From Wish TV and Community Health Network, this is a Health Spotlight Town Hall Special.
And good evening, everyone. Welcome to this News 8 Health Spotlight Special as we focus on suicide and suicide prevention tonight.
September is Suicide Prevention Month. Suicide greatly impacts Black, Latinx, LGBTQ populations, as well as young people and veterans.
Yeah, so suicide is a leading cause of death in the United States. Suicide rates increased 30% between 2000 and 2018, but did decline in 2019 and 2020.
And according to the latest statistics from the CDC, Indiana recorded 1,024 suicides in 2020. That's 15 deaths per 100,000 people. Think about that. Tonight, we'll address mental health and the stigma that comes with it, the impact on veterans and the minority community. A look at programs that are available, which is always very helpful, and what still needs to be done.
We got a lot to get to tonight, so you'll hear from a number of experts on these topics. We're joined by two of them right now. I want to welcome in Campbell Richardson, licensed clinical therapist. Thank you very much for being here, Campbell, as always. And Dr. Isaiah Sloss, a resident psychiatrist, both with Community Fairbanks Behavioral Health. Gentlemen, good to see you. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Lots to get to tonight. Okay, so we want to start with you, Campbell. Okay, so suicide, the leading cause of death in the United States. Here in Indiana, pretty preventable, right?
We think so. We think there's hope, and that's part of what today is. To get out the message that suicide is preventable, that there are therapies that work, and there's always hope.
Let's talk a little bit about who's impacted as far as the age groups and the ethnicities, because sometimes people need to put, you know, a face with some of the people that we're talking about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, literally anybody can be impacted, but we do know, I mean, if you want to throw some statistics out there, young youth and young adults, it's the second leading cause of death for that age group.
Why is that?
Starting at age 10.
Yeah. Oh, my goodness.
Starting at age 10. Well, a variety of reasons. I think there's still, unfortunately, some stigma associated with trying to get mental health help. We need more professionals in the areas that people can access the help. And I really hope that we get the message out that we can start teaching people about mental health hygiene as early as possible.
Mental health hygiene.
I just made that up.
I
just made it up.
No, but that's good.
Yeah.
To the stigma conversation, Dr. Sloss, I'll bring you in here. Cultural differences when it comes to that. What are they, and how can we break those barriers?
I'm glad you bring that up because I think in a lot of cultures, you know, in the Black community and other minority communities, we don't talk that much about our mental health. We don't talk about when we're struggling. Everyone really wants to try and put on a brave face because a lot of times there's a lot of people who are depending on you, or you want to be strong for those who are around you. But in reality, it's such a deep-rooted issue, and we all are going through tough situations, and sometimes you're just very vulnerable to you know, depression, anxiety. All those pressures kind of build up on people at different points in their lives. And young people, there's tons of stress around social media and school and pressure from peers and family. So it's important to be open and be able to have discussions and conversations about that because it gives a good outlet for those things.
Yes, absolutely.
And Dr. Sloss, you mentioned something that makes me think about, especially with the holidays coming up, the kitchen table conversations that are happening. I always get a kick out of generationally, like how people talk about this. You know, let's talk about the Black community, for instance. Obviously, we're not a monolith, but, you know, at these kitchen table conversations, the way that grandma talks about mental health might be a little different than the way that auntie talks about mental health. That might be a little different than maybe, you know, the teenagers in the group. How do we have these conversations when we talk to different generations about mental health?
It's one of those times where I think it's good to have a little humility, as hard as that is. You know, sometimes I'm sure you know, older generations might tell younger generations, oh, you haven't been through anything like I've been through. And everybody's struggle is different and unique to them. And just because we don't all go through the same things doesn't mean we don't all have the same feelings and emotions. And what really matters is how those things make you feel. And sometimes we kind of gloss over that. We don't really touch on how severely something is affecting you, or you know, how something is perceived. And I think that it's important that we maybe be a little bit more open in some of these kitchen top conversations and really find, you know, family members, if we can't have it openly with everyone, you know, find people who you feel confident that you can confide in and really open up to. And I think that's kind of support goes a long way.
And maybe have a little more grace too, right?
Definitely.
Opening up to you,
You know, I thought when Dr. Sloss said older generations, I thought I detected that he looked at me. That's all that.
I don't have eyes in the back of my head.
See?
But you know what? To that point, a lot of people, and I'll say a lot of men too, grew up in my time not talking about feelings at all.
Right.
At all. And that it wasn't allowed. Whether someone said you're not allowed to show X emotion, I mean, we didn't even know what the names of emotions were, some of us. So we had to learn the hard way.
And it was viewed as a weakness.
Absolutely it was.
How did COVID-19 play a role in the current stats that we see right now, Campbell?
Well,
And I want to get your opinion on this too, Doc, because I saw you slouch over there.
we'll see if we agree. But you know, we don't have necessarily more instances of major depression, which is, you know, instance of diagnosable clinical depression per se. But there's lots more instances of people who have kind of lower level depression and a little bit higher anxiety, along with I don't know how to cope with it because I've been away from people or I've been, you know, whatever the case may be. So we're right in that zone of people need more help and they don't know how to cope with it. That's the challenge.
Doctor?
So as somebody who even recently graduated from school, I was actually in medical school for, you know, at least the last, you know, 2 years of my medical education were during COVID. And it really changes how you go through things when you don't necessarily have, you know, people or peers nearby that you would once be able to kind of rely on and have those casual conversations and that personal connection to people, which I think is very preventative in a lot of things that you might see where people are at low points and, you know, friends and loved ones can see you and catch you and really try and reach out to you at that point. So I think the isolation that happened as a result of COVID really has affected a lot of people pretty significantly.
100%. And it's a conversation we'll continue to have because it's a big one and it impacts everyone. I'd like to bring in our Wishy-Bee medical team right now, Dr. Mary Gillis and former Surgeon General Dr. Jerome Adams, for a conversation on mental health and what needs to be done to get more people the help that they need.
You talk about mental health, or you're talking about mental health as a whole, but I want to sort of talk about the difference between, or let's say, is there the difference between a mental illness and mental wellness? So can you talk to me about the difference between the two? I mean, mental wellness, you don't necessarily have to have a psychiatric disorder to struggle with mental wellness. So can you speak to that?
When we talk about mental health, when we say the words mental health, far too often people think we're talking about mental illness. Or in many cases, we are talking about mental illness. But mental illness is just one end of the spectrum of overall mental health. As you mentioned, mental wellness is on the other end of the spectrum. And just as you can say you're obese and you need to lose weight, or you say I'm fine, but I want to strengthen my muscles so that I'm actually more physically fit, we need to understand there are things that we can do to strengthen our minds and to strengthen our mental health, even if we don't have a mental illness. And they will decrease the chances that we have a mental illness. But we also need to understand that sometimes you really are sick, you do have mental illness, and you need to feel comfortable going to your doctor, talking to your family, expressing the fact that you need help so that you can get the help that you deserve. We wouldn't feel ashamed to tell someone we rolled our ankle or that we were diagnosed with cancer, but we feel ashamed to tell someone that we're anxious and we're depressed. And that's what's really, I think, feeding at its root the mental health crises and the suicide crises and the opioid and addiction crises that we're seeing out there, the stigma attached to people promoting mental health and wellness and acknowledging mental illness.
Well, I like the example that you used instead of you sprain your ankle or you fracture your foot. You can go to the doctor, you see the x-ray, you see the injury, your doctor says you're going to be need a boot, you'll be in the boot for maybe 6 to 8 weeks, this is your recovery. Do you think part of the stigma and sort of the confusion around mental health is because it's not something that we can see. We don't have a piece of paper of our brain saying these chemical receptors are not sort of being, we don't have enough of these or we don't have enough of that, that we can't show someone and say this is what's going inside my brain. That's a great question. So in 2020, I put out a call to action when I was Surgeon General on suicide prevention. And one of the points that we emphasized in that call to action was the need to better train providers and prepare healthcare systems to screen people for mental health. There are evidence-based tools, just as there are to identify whether or not you have high blood pressure or diabetes, to identify whether you have or are at risk for depression, anxiety, and suicide. And the more that we can normalize that as being part of your overall health care, and then actually demonstrate to people that, hey, you're just like so many other people out there, but we also have treatments to help you get better or to help you deal with your mental health issues. I think the more people will be receptive to that idea. I'm so glad that you brought up your call to action implementation strategy for suicide prevention, the report that you published. You focused on several key things. So I want to you to tell me how much progress we've made in each of the areas that you've highlighted, especially as it relates to the Black community. So you talk about help other people build the skills, coping, problem solving, and resilience. What do you mean by that, and how's it looking? Well, just as we talked about with mental health, you can have mental illness, or on the flip side, you can build strengths. We know that people who are at risk for suicide, actually, you can work with them and build protective mechanisms by increasing their networks, by giving them a sense of purpose. And so what we want to do is continue to emphasize to people that, hey, loneliness can lead to suicide. Lack of purpose in your life, lack of a job itself, when we're so attached to our careers, can lead to suicide. So connecting those folks. Interestingly enough, we've seen in the veteran population that their rates of suicide go up precipitously when they leave the military. Why? Because they've lost their sense of purpose and they've lost their sense of community. And so there are real efforts in place and successful efforts to build community around those individuals once they separate from the military, and they've been shown to lower the chances someone will die by suicide. Right, having that community just being cut off and having nowhere to go, so sort of having them to sort of go to another place. And right, I mean, you talk about having a contribution to life, something they've always known, and their buddies who are going through the same thing, and suddenly everybody's separated and everything, you know, is gone. So building those networks. Exactly, and interestingly enough, we see that as a problem, because we can see people transition from doing okay to not doing okay. But unfortunately, far too many people in this country, including African American youth, including the LGBTQ community, including Native American and Indigenous persons, feel disconnected all the time. They don't have any point in their life when they feel like they're part of a community, they have purpose, they have control in their lives. And so we need to understand that what we're seeing happen in the military as people transition into being veterans is a state that exists for far too many people all the time. What about the increase in social, well, we talked about social, another point that you raised in your report, the increase in social connectedness and support, identify and support people at risk. We talked about veterans, we're talking about the Black community, we're talking about LGBTQ. I mean, how are we doing in all of these groups so far? Well, we have more data than ever on who is at higher risk for suicide. And so it's important that we take that data and implement programs, targeted programs to those communities. As you mentioned, the LGBTQ community, we know those individuals are at particularly high risk, especially here in Indiana, to feel isolated, to feel stigmatized, to feel like they don't have a community. And so we need to be particularly aware when they're exhibiting signs and symptoms of mental health issues or of suicidal ideation, and we need to target programs to those at-risk groups. We're doing a better job of it, but we need to continue to focus efforts to at-risk communities.
It's a great conversation. I want to go ahead and continue our talk with Campbell Richardson and Dr. Isaiah Sloss. Okay, so we were just talking about cultural differences, mindset shifts, but also let's talk about the death rate, especially when it comes to suicide, because it's the ugly stepsister in the room, right? But we have to talk about it, especially when it comes to Black men and the odds, I mean, we're talking about 4 times greater than for African American women back in 2018. Why is that? What's that attributed to?
Honestly, I think as a lot of these issues are, it's a really multifactorial thing. There's obviously the cultural issues and stigma that we've talked about, but then that's there without even talking about access to mental health resources and some of those things that were mentioned earlier about being able to express your emotions and understanding what you're feeling and how to verbalize that. A lot of people, and especially men, and I think black men as well, we aren't taught how to express those emotions. We aren't taught how to express weakness or fear. It's the message for the most part for a lot of people is you need to be tough and you have to deal with this and you have to get over this. And to be honest, there's only so much of that people have, because sometimes you spend so much effort and time trying to build up a tough wall, but at the end you end up very hollow.
Yep.
And that's when people kind of end up in a crisis because you're at the point where you're empty and you're still trying to push and do everything that you were doing before, but you don't have it inside to take care of yourself. And that can be really difficult for people when they kind of get to that point.
All gas, no brakes with no gas.
Exactly.
Or in other words.
Or in other words, absolutely. Absolutely.
Another fascinating stat, and we talked about black men, but black females grades 9 through 12, 60% more likely to attempt suicide in 2019 versus non-Hispanic whites. Why is that, gentlemen? Campbell, we'll go to you on this one.
Well, again, I think it's a combination of there's so much pressure. We don't know how to cope with it. We don't have our usual friends around us like we did. Now, it's different now in 2022. But, I read a recent study that talked about loneliness and how loneliness can affect how you think and feel. Now, that kind of sounds like, well, that's silly, of course, but it also affects people's physical health, too.
Yeah.
So it takes a toll. Being alone is different than being lonely.
Yeah, it is.
Right? Because we can be connected in lots of different ways, virtually, what have you. But when we're feeling lonely, that's a time when it's okay. It's even more important to reach out for help and that it's not a weakness.
Dr. Sloss?
Personally, for me, I think that there's a lack of access to some of these things that people need, like therapy. Is not something that's highly sought after in a lot of minority communities, and there's some reasons behind that. Some some might be just not really believing in taking those issues outside of the home, like everything happening with the family stays in the family. Some of it is also financial because, as we know, a lot of these things are not free.
Or trying to see themselves and the people that they're seeking out.
Right, and that's another thing, that there's a lack of representation in therapists and psychiatrists. There are simply not a lot of black men and women who are in these fields, and we're trying to work on that, obviously, but it's a slow process, and the need is so great. We're really fighting this from behind, so we have to get creative in how we address it in the future.
That's a good point.
No doubt. Gentlemen, thank you. We'll talk a little bit later in the show. Appreciate it. High-profile athletes going public with their mental health struggles, the impact they're having on helping to kick the stigma.
You're watching Wish TV, Indiana's only statewide TV news network. Health Spotlight, presented by Community Health Network.
Welcome back to this News 8 Health Spotlight special as we focus on suicide tonight and suicide prevention. Over the past couple of years, we've seen a much greater willingness to people to talk about mental health.
And that includes top-name entertainers and athletes, including the Kicking the Stigma initiative by our very own Indianapolis Colts.
Kicking the stigma means talking about it.
It's something that a lot of people go through. It's normal.
Nothing's wrong with you. And in fact, come join us because we all feel this way.
It's okay to feel not okay.
Kicking the stigma.
Let's go ahead and welcome in Steve Campbell, Vice President for the Indianapolis Colts. Okay, so Steve, you've done so much work in the community. Let's talk about mental health and kicking the stigma. In its second year, it's such a personal mission for Mr. Irsay and the Irsay family. Tell us why.
Well, I think they've talked about this several times, but the Irsay family has been touched by mental health disorders, and they've been pretty open in talking about the struggles that their family has had over several generations, and so that was a personal reason for them to want to embark upon talking about mental health. But then, as we saw during the pandemic, the mental health. Mental health is a crisis in this state and this country, and the pandemic only made it worse. So I think all of those forces came together to make the Irsays want to really dive into this issue and make this their signature issue for now, this season, and for years to come.
It's so amazing to me, and I know you know this from a personal standpoint. Talking to people, getting them to share bits of themselves and their stories, it's a difficult job. And, you all have done such a good job of finding other people who can do that. How difficult has it been to try to get the players involved and really peeling back the layers to talk about their mental health? Or is this something that most people have been pretty open to doing?
What we found is that I think the time is right for this conversation, because we've had so many people who have opened up and reached out to us about kicking the stigma. I mean, the Irsays have said, we've done a lot of things in our community over the years, over the almost 40 years that the Colts have been in Indianapolis, but this is the one that has resonated the most with our fans, with our friends, with our neighbors all across the state, and so we're seeing this conversation starting to change, and change from being one that's in the darkness and one that's in the light, where we all can discuss it, and getting other people involved, particularly our players. Believe it or not, it hasn't been that hard. I mean, a lot of our players believe in this cause, first of all, and a lot of them, like everyone else, as you pointed out, everyone has been touched by this issue in some way, and so our players have been just absolutely fantastic in stepping up and saying, hey, we're big, strong, tough professional athletes, but we care about the mental and emotional side of our bodies as well. And so we've been very, very just pleased and excited and just gratified that our players have wanted to step up and talk about this as well.
This week, I'm loving the fact that I get a chance to talk to you, because the Kicking the Stigma campaign actually gets a chance to fundraise in person again. Can we just put a shout of praise on that one? Because, my goodness,
Absolutely.
We're just excited to be able to be in person. It's a big night, right. Friday night. Talk to me about this, because, I mean, we know the Irsays, they know that they love to do star-studded everything, okay?
Well, this Friday night we're having our, as you mentioned, our first in-person fundraiser for Kicking the Stigma. It's called Beyond the Sidelines. It's going to be at the Lucas Estate up in Carmel. It's actually sold out. So for any of our fans or your viewers out there who wanted to attend, it is sold out, but there's still a way for people to participate in this fundraiser. They can participate by going to Colts.com/KTS, which stands for Kicking the Stigma, and they can make a donation, a general donation to the effort, or they could bid on a silent auction item. We have items that are up for bid, experiences with Peyton Manning, Tony Dungy, Pat McAfee, lots of sign gear. So folks can sign up, can get on our website and sign up to bid on some of these items.
I'm just excited to see what you all have in store. I know this event is sold out, but I'm glad that there's a call to action, that everyone can still take part, do their part. This is awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, it's our pleasure. Thanks so much for shining a light on this issue.
So what about other high-profile celebrities and their public discussions about their own mental health? Two names that jump out, Kanye West and Simone Biles. Our Mary Gillis talked with them with Wish TV medical expert Dr. Jerome Adams.
You talked about Simone Biles and how she came out with her. I mean, she, Olympic athlete, decided not to compete in some of the events because she was struggling with her mental health. What role do public figures who come out with their mental health struggles have? They can have a huge influence on kids. I mean, some for better or for worse. I mean, I think Simone Biles is a great example. A lot of girls, athletes, black Black young girls look up to her in that way, and have someone they can identify with as well. But then we also have on the other end, when Kanye West came out, who was seriously struggling, he got a lot of backlash from people, and people have sort of brushed him off as being someone who's not my words, but a lunatic. So what role or responsibility do these individuals play, and how do sort of parents I guess monitor the way in which their children see these people in terms of if they have who have a mental health struggle, and what is their role, let's say?
Well, you talk about celebrities like Simone Biles, like Naomi Osaka, like Kanye West. I think the more these individuals share their stories, the better it is overall for our ability to have open conversations about mental health and wellness. And young people nowadays are way more willing to talk about their feelings than what people my age, or certainly people my parents' age, are willing to. So we are moving in the right direction, and I think that is a testament to both the openness of young people and the role models who they look up to nowadays being willing to talk about these issues. It's interesting you talk about Kanye West and Simone Biles, two different mechanisms in some ways for being at risk for suicide. Simone Biles in a high-pressure job, a black female, someone who for multiple reasons may feel like she can't talk about her mental health issues. Kanye West, someone who's been open about the fact that he has mental illness, and you see that sometimes manifest in ways that can be harmful to him. I think they can be role models for different groups of people out there in helping them understand that, hey, I'm more like Kanye West. I have a identified mental illness that I need to see a doctor for, and sometimes just like your blood pressure gets a little high because you went a little crazy at the family dinner, and ate too many collard greens with too much salt in it. Maybe you're having a mental health issue at the moment related to your mental illness, and that's okay. It's okay for Kanye West. It's okay for me. Or you say you're in a high-stress job like I was in, and you see a Simone Biles out there, and you can see that she's stressed, and she said, okay, I need to take a break, and she took a break. And that helped other people, I think, across the country realize it's okay to take a break.
That was so brave. That was such a wonderful example of someone taking a break when they needed it. An Olympic athlete, imagine. I mean, I was just floored by that.
If she can take a break from the Olympics, then any of us can take a break at any time. I mean, she literally gave the entire country, and particularly young black girls, permission to take a break.
Well, a new mental health crisis hotline. Hear from one of the people waiting to get help to those in need.
Health Spotlight, presented by Community Health Network.
And welcome back to this Health Spotlight special as we focus on mental health and suicide prevention. Suicide is a leading cause of death among young Hispanics, especially among high school-aged girls.
Newsay's Camila Fernandez asked an expert what can be done to address that issue.
Let's welcome in Axa Troncoso. She is a clinical social worker with Community Health Network. Axa, I want to talk to you specifically about suicide and the Latino community. We know suicide is a leading cause of death for young Hispanics. Does that number surprise you?
After reviewing the statistics, I was surprised, but not terribly surprised by the numbers, as we have seen an increase not only in the Hispanic population, but the population at large as well since COVID.
And the numbers are especially high for Hispanic girls, especially in the high school age range. What's the reason behind that, and how can we address that to lower those numbers?
Well, that's been a challenge, that being in our society for many, many years. I could tell you that throughout the time that I've been in the United States, one of the things that I think could be influencing and impacting those numbers are a challenge that we have seen for a while, but I believe that this is kind of like a dual challenge. Within the Hispanic population, we have two groups. We have the Hispanics that migrated from their country, original country, and we have the Hispanic Americans, the children born in the United States. I believe that both of those groups have their own challenges that ultimately probably affect their options to access mental health.
And that could trickle down or make an impact on children in the household, in the homes, right? And that could also play a factor in suicide rates.
I agree with you. I also feel that this lack of social inclusion from the parents put the child in a very special place, or even challenging place, because I call these kids bicultural. I believe that they have to meet in their homes expectations from their parents' culture as well as the culture at large. Therefore, that's another, huge challenge that young youth have to experience in terms of, do I want to talk to my parent about my problem? Well, why would I want to talk to my parent about my problem when my parent has no idea about what this system looks like? So it makes the communication between parents and child very difficult for children to come to their parents and say, I need to tell you my problems.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Aksa, thank you so much. Is there anything else that you wish to add?
I just appreciate the fact that during a difficult time in society that we can all pull together to try to make a better society for everybody, and including this special population, the Hispanics in the United States.
Aksa, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
Not a problem. Thank you so much.
Good conversation there. Meanwhile, the number of veterans taking their own lives is on the decline. ITMH Richard Essex talked with the head of the VA's suicide prevention program about the findings of a new report.
Welcome in, Dr. Matt Miller. You are the director of the Veterans Administration's suicide prevention program. Thank you, doctor, for joining us.
Thank you.
The new National Suicide Prevention Report is out, and there's some good news inside of it. Talk to us.
There is some good news inside of it in the context of there are no celebrations for the VA as long as one veteran dies by suicide. But within the annual report, we see across 2019, 2020, close to a 10% decrease in veteran suicide rate. We see 650 fewer veteran lives lost to suicide in 2019 and 2020. We see a 14% reduction in suicide rate for women veterans across that time period. It gives us strong reinforcement for the work that's being done from a public health perspective, and we continue forward based upon that.
Women are often not included or often discussed when it comes to Veterans Affairs. What have you gleaned from the women that have been in this report?
That they appreciate, that they benefit greatly, and that they utilize well VHA services. We see, for example, that our female veterans who are in VHA services, their rate of suicide when it was really increasing across the nation in the veteran population was lower and slower. It's about 22% from 01 to about 18. You compare that to non-VHA women veterans across that same time period, rate of increase was about 67, 68%. So women veterans have appreciated the adjustments that VHA and VA has made to serve their needs, recognizing and acknowledging really, really critically important aspect of the veteran population.
there's still the service members, still that kind of rough and tumble type of attitude where they don't want to come in for help. Are you implementing any programs, maybe as early as basic training on how to deal with mental health?
And I would encourage people to check out our current campaign. It's in partnership with the Ad Council. And we went to veterans and we presented nearly that scenario and said, what message needs to be communicated? What we heard from our veteran focus groups was, let's tell veterans, let's tell each other, don't wait, reach out. And that became then the campaign and the commercials and the website that have come from that. If you go to va.gov/reach, you can see our public service announcements. More importantly, you can see the resources that are available and how veterans can really navigate by their own determination of what they need.
Taking this report and looking at the snapshot in the Veterans Administration, what can we take from that and apply it to the overall community?
I think one of the biggest applications is the importance of the community, the role and the value of the community. There's a meaningful portion of veteran suicides where mental health has a role to play, and advancing highest quality mental health services, definitely front and center suicide prevention. But there are numerous situations where mental health may not be the front and center issue. It may be issues that are more found outside of the clinical walls. And that's where the community and connection with the community and resources within the community for veterans and non-veterans alike becomes really important. And that's the message that we've been communicating. And I hope people hear when we announce today our Staff Sergeant Parker Gordon Fox Suicide Prevention Grant awardees in the community across the nation.
Dr. Matt Miller, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Well, there's a new tool that could save your life in a mental health crisis. 988 is now the nation's new mental health crisis number. News 8's government reporter Garrett Berquist introduces us to one of the voices you might hear on that line.
The Division of Mental Health says Indiana is already in a good spot for the 988 rollout. That's because not only does Indiana already host 3 National Crisis Line call centers, it has its own 211 and Be Well call centers. According to the state suicide prevention program, state data show more than 1,000 people take their own lives in Indiana every year. Suicide is the second leading cause of death in this state for those ages 10 to 34. And Indiana's suicide rate has exceeded the national average every year since 2000.
I would guess if I asked the individuals in this room if they know what the current National Suicide Prevention Lifeline number is, a few of you would know, but many of you would not know. It was 1-800-273-TALK. But by making this an easy 3-digit number, more individuals will reach out for help.
Answering the crisis line is personal for Morgan Chafin. She faced her own mental health crisis not long ago.
I have had experiences with suicidal ideation and things along that realm. So I understand being in that kind of hardship and not knowing what to do next.
Chafin is now a suicide prevention call handler at A Better Way in Muncie. It's part of the existing Suicide Prevention Lifeline, and it will be one of 5 988 call centers in the state. National mental health groups say they're worried the call centers won't have enough people to handle the call volume. State health officials say Indiana's system should be fine.
We're doing everything we can to ensure that we can handle whatever volume is coming. Related to what happens if other states can't answer the calls, those will not be routed to Indiana, but will go to the national backups.
Chafin says she and her colleagues are ready to listen.
Just someone listening and being able to understand what I was going through would have helped a ton. I'm excited. I'm looking forward to it. I think that making this number brings a lot of awareness to mental health.
Officials say the 988 number is just the beginning. They hope to pair it with crisis response teams over the next 5 to 10 years. If you have the existing Lifeline number saved into your phone, that number will still work. As a reminder, that number is 1-800-273-TALK. At the State House, Garrett Bergquist, Wish TV, wishtv.com, and follow us on Facebook.
So the question is, why aren't more people, especially minorities, seeking help for their mental health? Dr. Tamika Anderson says there are several reasons why.
There's been, centuries and decades of systemic and structural factors that have led to inequalities in access to healthcare and mistrust amongst our community. I mean, Blacks have been involved in a lot of immoral studies, where they went to seek help and were injected with a disease and like the syphilis and the list goes on. And so that really puts a barrier to trusting the healthcare system. There's a lot of lack of accessibility. Blacks have a higher unemployment rate and also a higher lack of health insurance. So they don't even have access to get the help that they need, even if they wanted it. Additionally, there are only 2% of psychiatrists identify as Blacks and only 4% of psychologists. And so Blacks make up about 13.2% of the U.S. population. And we know representation matters, right? So Blacks want to see other, they want to seek help from people who look like them. A huge piece in the Black community that has helped us be, I guess, resilient, if we want to, say that, is our faith. And a lot of times there's a negative stigma to even seek out mental health or to say that you need help because it's considered a weakness. A lot of, Black boys are told, hey, don't cry, suck it up, you're being weak. And it's not to be mean. It's that our culture has had to be strong in so many words. We couldn't dwell on the traumas that we've experienced throughout our lifetimes as Blacks with so much racism and discrimination and inequality because we had to survive. And so people now are living at a state of feeling that they have so much pressure on them to act perfect or to smile when they're really, drowning inside or having so much pain. And they're afraid to seek the help because they're like, does that mean that my faith is not strong enough? Or am I not the strong Black woman that, we're often called, and it's just not true. We all struggle, we all go through things, and it is actually a sign of resiliency and strength. So I tell my patients all the time to seek that help, because to admit to that you need help, that you can't do it on your own, to go past, fight through that fear, really does show strength and resiliency. And we just need to debunk that negative stigma that, it's a weakness to seek help, because we all do need help.
All right, coming up, keeping loved ones safe by keeping guns out of reach. Why that is so important in suicide prevention.
You're watching Wish TV, Indiana's only statewide TV news network. Health Spotlight, presented by Community Health Network.
And welcome back to this Health Spotlight special as we focus on mental health and suicide prevention tonight.
We want to talk about the things that you can do to help stop someone who may want to harm themselves. One part of the discussion is having guns safely stored in the home. Let's go ahead and show you these numbers from the CDC. In 2020, more than 52% of suicides in the United States used a firearm. That percentage is even higher in Indiana, 59.5%. Making it harder to get a gun in those critical moments is one of the things that we talked about with Wish TV medical expert and former U.S. Surgeon General, Dr. Jerome Adams.
What about support lethal means safety? What do you mean by that? And in your report, as I'm talking about, what you're talking about in your report? Well, is this gun protection and when people have guns in their household, and I mean, is that what we're talking about here? And
well, it's important to know that for every one person who dies by suicide, there are thousands of people who have suicidal ideation, or who make a suicide attempt. And so what we want to do is not just prevent people from dying by suicide, the 1.4 million people every year who actually die by suicide, or who actually make an attempt, but we also want to intervene where we can. And we know that 90% of people who attempt suicide using a firearm are successful. So understanding that is incredibly important. Studies show you have about 10 minutes between when a person decides they're going to take their life and when they actually make the attempt. And if you can separate them from a lethal means during that 10 minutes, you can actually break the cycle and lower the chances that they're going to try to take their life. Many people think, well, they'll just go and try it another way. That's actually not true. The data we have shows us that if you can separate them from lethal means during that critical time frame, then that increases the chances that they will not die by suicide in the future. So one of the recommendations we make in my Surgeon General's report is that we promote lethal means safety. And I want to be clear, guns and any conversation about guns is controversial. This is not about taking guns away from people. It's about helping people understand, look, you're at risk for suicide. You own a firearm. If you're starting to have these signs and symptoms or have these feelings, maybe give your gun to a friend. Even something as simple as storing your firearm in a different place than your ammunition and having them both locked up creates that time so that you actually can think through and say, okay, I really don't want to do this, as opposed to just picking up the loaded gun that's sitting out on your dresser and it taking your life.
That is such a great point. And I'm thinking also, since we were talking about young teenagers before, if they have the household parents or have a gun and the ammunition is in one place, but the firearm is locked up in another place, and that 10 minutes, so much can happen. It sort of doesn't just go from there to there.
Exactly. Three main ingredients for a successful suicide attempt. Number one is a crisis. So we want to identify, it's at-risk people, but then they have a crisis, and then there's often alcohol or drugs involved, so they're in an altered state of mind, and then it's easy access to lethal means. So I'm someone who for whatever reason, am at risk, and I get yelled at, I lose my job, I break up with my spouse. You have that immediate crisis, and you go out and you drink a little bit too much, or you smoke some marijuana, and there's a gun laying around, a loaded gun. So anything that we can do to disrupt that pattern will lower the chances that someone actually dies by suicide.
The full Dr. Adams interview is available now on the All Indiana Podcast Network. All you have to do is download it and share it with your friends.
I want to bring back Campbell Richardson and Dr. Isaiah Sloss now. Dr. Sloss, we were just talking off camera that if people do need help, there are avenues out there that they can take, including maybe getting admitted to a hospital, right?
Definitely. And, part of my job is taking care of people when they're dealing with a pretty severe episode of their mental illness. And when you come into the hospital, obviously our goal is to make sure you're safe. And usually we aim to try and really stabilize you and get you to the point to where you are going to be safe to go home. And it's important for people to know that, like, you're treated well in the hospital. We try and make sure that you have all your needs met. We have therapy. And we kind of get a lot of the initial steps in that very, very acute episode. But beyond that, we set people up with outpatient services. A lot of people, once leaving the hospital for a suicide attempt or even episodes of severe psychosis, it's not the end-all be-all. And just because you have a very low point doesn't mean that that's your outlook for the rest of your life. A lot of people get regular follow-up and get established with therapy and with psychiatry if there's any medications involved. And people live regular lives. They go work their jobs. They take care of families. They can be very, I don't want to say normal, but you can live a full life even with mental illness.
Yeah. Campbell, speak to that. Speak to the fact that there is a plan to help people be successful.
Let me tell you about a study that they did about 10 years ago where they interviewed people who made a very, very serious suicide attempt in California off of the Golden Gate Bridge. That's a pretty serious attempt. They found people who had survived that incident, not very many, about 40. They interviewed them, and one of the questions was, what was one of your first thoughts after you jumped? And they all said the same thing, which was, I made a mistake.
I made a mistake.
I made a mistake. So what I'm telling you is there's hope. Even in somebody's darkest moment, there's hope that you can get better. Your situation may not get better. Your situation may even deteriorate, depending if you have an illness or something, but how you feel and how the quality of life that you can have can be okay.
And there is help out there.
Definitely.
Yeah. All right. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for being here tonight. Right. Important conversation, of course, and we can always have much more information online at wishtv.com as well. Gentlemen, good to see you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks
Great
for having
information.
us.
All right, that's it for us. We'll see you back here tonight at 10 and 11. The Zone Extra is next. Have a good night.
From Wish TV, this is The Zone Extra, presented by Franciscan Health Sports Medicine. Coming up tonight, it's a week full of great high school action, including the start of the girls' golf state tournament. In the Coach's Corner, meet the man leading the top 10 ranked girls soccer program at Garin Catholic. Plus, our athlete of the week just led Park Tudor to a sectional title and has the Panthers gearing up for regionals.
The team's been great. The season's been super fun, and I'm excited to see what we have to come.
We're jumping for joy. The Zone Extra starts now.
Good evening and welcome to the Zone Extra. I'm Angela Maury, and what a great week of high school sports with a full slate of everything, including the start of the girls' golf state tournament. In Coach's Corner, he's leading a top 10 girls soccer program in Class 2A. Garin Catholic's Sean Yao joins me in studio. Plus, our athlete